So, hello, all of you again. So, we're back with one more lesson. We're back with one more lesson. So, in the last lesson, we have seen the beginning parts of the respiratory system. We have seen the functions of nose, nasal cavity, and the pharynx, right? Nose, nasal cavity, pharynx, and the larynx as well. Four parts we have seen, right? Nose, nasal cavity, larynx, pharynx, and the larynx. And what is the importance of this epiglottis, glottis, and what function this larynx voice box plays a role there? Yes. And the next part that we have is the trachea. Next part that we have is trachea. In common language, it can simply be is called as the wind pipe. Right? The trachea that we have commonly is being referred as the wind pipe, and it is made of muscles. Right? It is made of the muscles. That is why to support this trachea, right? So it is supported by the trachea is supported by hyaline cartilaginous rings. Hyaline cartilaginous rings. Right, hyaline cartilaginous rings that you are seeing here. So, right, these hyaline cartilaginous rings. The significance of these rings is they are alphabet C-shaped rings. Right, they are C-shaped rings. They are C-shaped rings, and they are incomplete. They are the incomplete rings. Yes, these are the incomplete rings because they are of the C shape, right? On the side they are fully covered. On the back of it, they are not, merging with one another. They are not. They kind of, have this gap there. So that is the incomplete cartilaginous rings. What is the function of them? They support. They support the trachea so that it doesn't collapse. And it stays as in the form of a tube. Right? And it goes down into the thoracic cavity at the fifth thoracic vertebrae. Right? So this is the very important point. Right? So at the fifth thoracic vertebrae, so it gets split. Into two branches. Let's split into two branches, and these are now called as the bronchi. Bronchi is the plural, and bronchus is the singular. So one goes to the left lung and one goes to the right lung, right? So we should be on this way, and this should be your right lung, and this is the left lung, right? So this bronchi goes to this respective lungs which are spongy vascular bags, right? So the bronchi enters or opens into the lungs. We're going to see about lungs in a short while now. What happens to this bronchi? Is they further go on splitting. You can see, so it gets branched out. Right? You are seeing it has come down here and it got branched, and it has come down here and it got branched here, and it's further as it goes down, it keeps getting branched out. So you are seeing all these branches. You are seeing all these branches, right? So as it goes down, it's keep further getting branched and branched, and the tubes as well. The tubes as well keep getting narrowed and narrowed, narrowed, narrowed. So this bronchi, as a matter of fact, these are called as the primary bronchi. Primary bronchi, and this primary bronchi are further splitting or further branching, and further branching you call them as secondary and tertiary bronchi. Ultimately you can call them as the terminal bronchioles. So it's nothing but smaller tubes, right? So when you compare with the trachea, bronchi is bit smaller, and followed by secondary is bit smaller, and tertiary is further smaller than this, and bronchioles will be the smallest. Bronchioles will be smallest, and these bronchioles will open into this sacs, the sac-like structures called as the alveoli, or simply we can call them as the air sacs. Alveoli, so we can simply can refer them as the air sacs. So these are grapes like structures, right? So you are seeing how this grapefruits hanging from the branches of it. Same way here, there is this small sacs here accumulated all over the place here, all over the place. So these are our the air sacs, which are actually the places, where the gaseous exchange takes place, right? This alveoli where the actual gaseous exchange takes place. And how is that made possible? How is that made possible here is because these air sacs and alveoli are made of simple squamous epithelium, right? It is just made of one single layer of epithelial cells, right? We have this alveoli made of just one single layer, irregularly shaped. We have seen when we are studying the tissues in our first year classes. We have this irregularly shaped cells, right? We have this irregularly shaped cells. You see, without having any clear boundaries. So this will be your simple squamous. So the same thing that you would find in the capillaries. The same thing that you would find in the capillaries also is being found here, right? Also is being found in the alveoli where the exchange is taking place, and it is richly supplied with the blood vessels as well, so that the exchange can happen between the layers of blood vessels. Right adjacent, right next to it, we have this accumulation of all the blood vessels, right? So that the exchange can, the air will be brought here and it will be placed in this capillary. With the help of the diffusion. It is also made of the simple squamous epithelium, so that the exchange can happen easily, right? So that is one thing. If you see this entire length of it, the respiratory tubular system, right? So the respiratory tubules, will have two parts. One is the conducting system, right? And then we have the exchange part, or simply we can consider of system, we can call it as conducting part, and then we have the exchange part. Conducting part conducts the air, right? All these parts starting with the beginning with the nose all the way down here to the terminal bronchioles, right? To the terminal bronchioles, to the tertiary terminal bronchioles, we can call it as the conducting part, and the exchange part. Exchange part actually is the alveoli, right? The exchange part, as a matter of fact, is the alveoli, and all of this, the bronchi, bronchioles, trachea, pharynx, and the nasal cavity, all of this will be considered the exchange part of it. Conducting part of it, and alveoli is considered the exchange part of it, right? So that is the function of trachea, bronchi, bronchioles. And one more important point that we have is to what extent the presence of this incomplete cartilaginous rings are there, right? So they are up to from the trachea to the level of tertiary bronchioles as well. To the level of tertiary bronchioles, we still have the presence of these cartilaginous rings, right? Throughout this, you are seeing that here, even in here as well, you have the presence of this incomplete cartilaginous rings. So that is about the trachea, bronchi, and bronchioles. And the next one that we have is the lungs. And the next one that we have is the lungs. So that is the windpipe that we are seeing here. Yeah, we'll just try to draw the diagram of lungs. So the windpipe and the bronchi, just now we have seen, right? Bronchi, and we have two lungs. We have two lungs. Yeah, and on this side as well. On this side as well, we have the lungs. Okay. So what is the difference between the arrangement of these lungs that we have? The difference between the arrangement of lungs. The difference between arrangement of lungs is, so this will be the right lung, and this will be the left lung. Right lung and left lung. And this right lung has three parts. Right? So right lung is broader compared with the left lung. It is broader and it has three lobes. It is divided into three lobes. But when it comes to left lung, it is only divided into two lobes. It is only divided into two lobes. And as well, the left lung is slightly larger, a tad, not even this much. It is only slightly longer than the right lung. The reason why it is longer and why it is bit shorter here is, on the right side, in the head, not in here, in the somewhere here. So this will be our dome shaped diagram. And in here, what do we see is, you would see the liver on the right side. You would see the liver. On the left side, you would see the stomach. On the left side, we have the stomach. On the right side, you have the liver. So to accommodate the liver, so it is slightly of smaller length, but it is broader. And one more point here is, so we have this space here between the lungs, right? So we have this space, and this space is called as, right? So this space is called as mediastinum. Right? This space is called as the mediastinum. This one actually houses, right? This one actually houses the heart, right? This one actually houses the heart. Heart is placed in this mediastinum, which products, most of the thoracic cavity, is occupied. Most of the thoracic cavity is occupied by lungs only. Right? Most of the thoracic cavity is occupied by the lungs only, right? And these lungs are protected, right? These lungs are protected by various skeletal elements and muscles as well, right? These lungs are protected by various skeletal muscles and lungs. Lungs dorsally, right? Lung dorsally are covered by what? Dorsally are covered by vertebral column. That means the dorsal protection for the lungs is coming from the vertebral column. And ventrally what we have? Ventrally we have the sternum. Ventrally we have the sternum, and laterally you can say we have the ribs, right? We have the ribs, and between these ribs we have these important muscles which help in the process of respiration. The muscles which are present in the ribs are called as costal muscles, right? Costal muscles we call it, right? The muscles which are present between the ribs are called as costal muscles. So we have two kinds of costal muscles are there. There are external, as a matter of fact we can call them as intercostal muscles, right? So they are present between the ribs, that is why they are called as intercostal muscles. There are external intercostal muscles, and then we have the internal intercostal muscles. There are external intercostal muscles and internal intercostal muscles. They play a very important role in the process of breathing, exchange of gases. We shall see how it plays a very important role. And towards the posterior side, so this will be anterior, and this is the posterior side. And in this side, what we have is, as a protection, we have this diaphragm. Posteriorly, we have the diaphragm posteriorly. If you see, on the dorsal side we have vertebral column, on the ventral side we have sternum, connected with the dorsal and ventral side. On the laterally we have the ribs. Between the ribs we have these intercostal muscles. These intercostal muscles are two kinds, that is external, and then we have the internal intercostal muscles, external and as well as internal intercostal muscles. And on the posterior side for the lungs, and on the posterior side what we have the diaphragm. So we have the diaphragm, which also plays a very important role in the mechanism of the breathing, right? And these lungs on the outside are protected by this double layered membrane, right? On the outside is protected by this double layered membrane, right? Double layered membrane, right? So what is this double layered membrane? Is called as the pleura. I'll just erase this, right? So lungs externally, so we are seeing this layer, right? Two layers are there now. Yes. So lungs lungs externally, so here on the outside are protected by what? Protected by pleura. Protected by pleura. So we have two kinds of pleura is there. There is parietal pleura, which is outside. That means towards this end. Towards this end, what we have is parietal pleura. So this will be our parietal pleura. Right? This will be our parietal pleura, and this will be our visceral pleura. Yes, which is outside. Is called as parietal pleura, which is inside, almost merging with the kind of the spongy structures of lungs, is called as the visceral pleura. And this parietal pleura is there now. This parietal pleura is almost in touch with the thoracic cavity. What does that mean here is, the lungs are in this airtight chamber. Right? This outer covering of the lungs, which is protecting, is almost in contact with the thoracic cavity. What does that mean here is, if there are any changes in the thoracic cavity, and the same kind of changes will also be reflected in the lungs. Why will it be reflected? Because of the reason that it is in close association with the thoracic cavity, right? It is in close association with the thoracic cavity, and what are the changes that are there will obviously be reflected here. Then the thoracic cavity will be reflected in the pulmonary cavity or the lung cavity, right? And this inside of it, right? So this inside of it has this fluid, right? Has this fluid called as pleural fluid. So has this fluid called as the pleural fluid. What does it do? What does it do is, it prevents the friction, right? It prevents the friction, right? So the pleural fluid prevents the friction, as you continuously breathe in and breathe out, these two layers slide over each other smoothly because of the presence of this pleural fluid. And whenever there is no sufficient amount of pleural fluid, then obviously the sliding over each other gets difficult. That's why you feel a slight tinge of pain in such a situation where there is no pleural fluid. And if there is any inflammation or a problem with the pleural membrane, leads to this disease called as pleurisy. Yes. So that is the story about the lungs. Where are they placed? They are placed in this airtight chamber called as thoracic cavity. Majority of the place in thoracic cavity is occupied by the lungs, right? In the middle of the lungs we have this small space, and the space is called as mediastinum, which is housing the heart, and as well as this greater blood vessels, and as well the esophagus. All of them pass down from here. And the lungs are protected by the vertebral column, sternum, ribs, diaphragm. So we have seen the locations of all of those, right? And those also has to be remembered. And the two membranes which are protecting the lungs, right? The outer membrane is the parietal membrane, and inner membrane will be the visceral membrane. Between these two membranes we have the circulating fluid, right? We have the circulating fluid, and this fluid is called as the pleural fluid, which obviously prevents the friction when there is this inhalation and exhalation in the lungs. Right? And if there is any inflammation or disease with the pleural fluid, and in this we call it as the pleurisy. So that is the story about the lungs. In the next segment, then hopefully we are clear about the conducting system and as well as exchange system of lungs, and brief anatomy of the lungs as well. Please to remember why it is divided into three, and how it is divided into two, and why it is kind of broader, why it is kind of larger, and what is the location of the liver, and all those anatomical aspects also are very important for you. Yes, and that is our class for today, and we shall be wrapping up. So thanks for visiting the page. Please do like and subscribe. Thank you all of you.